Get the mental energy and focus you need with Magic Mind. Head to magicmind.com/Gators. Use code Gators20 to get up to 56% off your first subscription.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Coming at you with co-host Will Miles. You can find him at the site readandreaction.com, on YouTube at Read and Reaction as well. Here we are, Will. Gators hit the practice field today for the first edition 2024 spring practice. We had rumors of a fight coming out earlier today that, of course, was way before practice even started. So I think you can put the timeline together and say, no, that wasn't good. That wasn't the case. But hey, good to see the team out there. Billy Napier had plenty to say after practice. We'll get into a couple of highlights there as well. Saw Graham Mertz on the field, DJ Lagway on the field. That was of course, everybody looking at the quarterbacks, especially with the 5-star coming in. But good to see the orange and blue out there on the practice field.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously last year left a bad taste in our mouth, left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. So new stuff to talk about, new things to see, new discussion points for Napier and for the players as they get interviewed as well. Certainly a welcome sight considering that, you got the 5-game losing streak to end last year, and there just isn't anything a whole lot positive to talk about. And so hopefully spring practice is going to give us some of those. And then obviously, there will probably be a little bit of machinations on the roster after the spring practice. But, look, this is an exciting time of year. Hope springs eternal, right? When you get to spring practice, obviously don't believe anything that anybody tells you because it's just all sorts of lies at this point along the way. But if nothing else, it's a lot of fun to see these guys back out there and have new stuff to talk about.
Absolutely. So I know, as I mentioned, after practice, about an hour ago is when Billy Napier got done speaking to the media. Tyler Miles, the new director of player athletic development, of course, is going to speak. And I believe a few players were going to as well. So we'll have coverage all throughout gatorsbreakdown.com. Probably another episode in the next couple of days as well. And Ron Roberts is supposed to speak this weekend after practice, and I believe Rob Sell as well, if I remember right. So that was off the top of my head. So I know Ron Roberts for sure. I'm trying to remember if Rob Sell speaks as well. So plenty of coverage coming up. Then the Gators are on spring break, so 2 practices, spring break, and then they'll come back and start spring practice all over again. A little bit of announcement, Will. I put it on Twitter earlier today, but a unique episode next week. Noel Portenjagin, the German offensive lineman. I hope I said his name right. I think I did. But he's going to join Gators Breakdown next week. He's going to be in Germany for spring break. So I'm sure as soon as practice is over Saturday, he'll be hopping and going home. But have him on Gators Breakdown next week. And it'll be a pretty unique story, coming from Germany to Florida, taking part in his first spring practice today. I thought a unique and kind of personal story we'll get next week from him on Gators Breakdown.
That's exciting. I'm interested to hear what he has to say. And certainly, with the needs on the offensive line, and he's sort of an unknown when it comes to the way high school rankings happen and the way evaluations happen and those sorts of things. So just understanding sort of, hey, how do you get on Billy Napier's radar? What's it look like from all these different programs once you do end up on someone's radar? And, like we always sort of talk about making sure you recruit the state of Florida, but Napier going all the way to Germany to make sure he's filling out the offensive line, certainly not leaving any stone unturned. So interested to hear what he has to say. And that's an exciting one.
Yeah, should be good. Should be a good one. So look out for that one next week right here on Gators Breakdown. Before we get there, like and subscribe. Hit that like button. That really helps us out here on Gators Breakdown. Subscribe right here on YouTube if you're watching us live or watching the replay. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform if you want to listen to us on the go, all that good stuff. Leave a comment, all that stuff. All your support really helps us out right here on Gators Breakdown. As I mentioned, gatorsbreakdown.com, plenty of coverage of spring practice coming up this week as well. Gators Breakdown Plus, if you want to keep talking about it, right there on that Discord. A lot of discussion going on there today. So, all right, well, let's get going. Let's start with a list here of probably the best way to start it. Guys who are participating, but in a no-contact jersey. So linebacker Shamar James, no surprise, kind of a storyline as we were going, spring practice preview earlier this week. Kind of wondered if he'd be limited. Figured he would be with that late season injury last year. But he was out there, just no contact. Shamar James with that knee, defensive lineman Joey Slackman, Austin Barber, Derek Wingo, safety Jordan Castell, Justice Boone, and Bryce Capers. All those guys were out there, just no contact. And then guys who were in the no contact jersey and did not participate, Jack Pyburn, no surprise there with his late season injury, tight end Keon Zipperer, wide receiver Chimere Dike, and running back Cam Carroll. So get that out of the way. You get a little, see who was out there and participating and not participating. So, all right, let's go. We'll start with the quarterback spot. And Billy Napier, of course, got asked about that. Graham Mertz returning, the big high-profile DJ Lagway going through his first practice. Billy Napier was asked about it. Let's hear from him.
He has the respect of the entire organization and the respect of his teammates. I think over time, his example, not only through his work ethic, but I think as a competitor, right? The toughness, the way he prepares, the way he treats people, not just his teammates, but I would say all throughout the building, right? He's a consummate pro. I think the quarterback sets the standard for the entire team and organization, and he's done that. So him being back is a huge deal, not only for him personally and our team, but also for DJ as well. So I think just in general, his leadership, his voice, the guy's – it's a big deal for the Florida Gators that Graham Mertz is back to play quarterback. So a ton of advantages, and I think confidence, there's a ton of confidence there.
You spoke to Graham about DJ coming in. He seemed almost excited about the opportunity to kind of mentor DJ and help him acclimate. What have you seen just those two interacting?
Well, first of all, they both have character. They both have awareness and perspective. I think they can see the big picture. There's no ego there. There's a certain confidence and humility that both guys have, right? So I think there's an understanding of their role, so they've embraced that, right? And they've worked alongside each other. I think Graham's on a mission, came back with a purpose, not only to increase his value personally, but for our team to accomplish more. And then certainly DJ being a young player, being a rookie, there's a ton to learn there. So the advantage of DJ being able to observe Graham, and then certainly Graham's embraced that mentorship and done a phenomenal job so far.
What was your view of DJ Lagway today?
Yeah, I see a kid who loves to play, and he's fun to coach. He's got unique ability. I think the size, the athleticism, the arm talent. But probably the best thing about him is just the work ethic, the desire to learn, the perspective and understanding and awareness that he knows he's got a lot of work to do to get better, but finally to see him in a football setting, to just let him go play. So, just to see him smiling and having a good time, I think he loves the game, and that was very apparent out there today.
Billy Napier right there talking about Graham Mertz and, of course, DJ Lagway. And, Will, I think looking at what happened on this offense at the other positions, losing Ricky Pearsall, losing Trevor Etienne, man, I think it was so big that Graham Mertz did decide to come back, taking those aspects into account as well. If Florida's going to exceed expectations to go through this very tough schedule and to exceed expectations, I think it's going to take a returning quarterback. And, of course, that's Graham Mertz there. And now, a year ago, he was learning this offense. He was taking his first snap as a Florida Gator. And now a year later, of course, now he gets to share all that knowledge, everything he built last year, and get to share it with DJ Lagway. So I do think, taking all into account, you don't have – I'm sure Florida would have hit the transfer portal anyway, but still, you don't have to turn the keys over already to DJ Lagway. You get to hopefully help make up for losing Ricky Pearsall and already having a rapport with Trey Wilson that stems from last year and a late season run between those two guys, hooking up as the season went along. And then, of course, losing the explosiveness of ETN, I think the focus – and you focused on it. I asked Graham Mertz about it. I heard Graham Mertz talk about it even more. Yes, there is a focus in hitting some more of those explosives in the passing game. You know what? That may help make up for Trevor Etienne and the explosion that he provided in the run game. So I do think everything else that went on around the offense and some new pieces along the offensive line as well. I think having a returning quarterback is huge for Florida to make, hopefully exceed expectations this year.
If nothing else, it establishes what the floor at that position is going to be.
Good point.
I don't know what Graham Mertz's ceiling is. Certainly, I think they've built things around him to help. You bring in a guy like Shamir Dike, somebody he knows from Wisconsin. Now, hopefully, there's a connection there between those guys that exists from when they were at Wisconsin. You bring in 2 new tackles to really emphasize the competition at that specific spot. You figure that you've got Trey Wilson as one of the big weapons on the outside. Who's going to step up, whether it's Andy Jean, Aiden Mizell, Jere Hawkins, or Tweski Abrams? Somebody's going to have to step up into a role that's bigger. Maybe it's Marcus Burke or somebody like that who steps up, Khalil Jackson. But people are going to have to step up into those bigger roles. But you really kind of know what you're getting from a floor when it comes to Mertz. Which means that if Lagway starts really getting snaps, he's earned those snaps, as opposed to if Mertz had decided to go pro, if Mertz had decided to transfer someplace else, then Lagway comes in and he's sort of the starter by default, but you don't know whether he's actually really earned it. And so
Lagway, it's not like Luke Del Rio's out there.
So, look, if Lagway comes in and gets real snaps, we will know that he took those snaps away from Graham Mertz and earned that. And the fact that these two guys seem to really get along well is great. But I also think, look, Mertz has to be realistic about his prospects. I think he's probably at best a late round NFL draft pick. And the path is probably more when it comes to coaching anyway for Mertz long term. And so this is an opportunity to sort of start that, establish that, and really sort of impart the knowledge that he has. And he seems to have that sort of attitude as well. So look, maybe he comes out, has an awesome year, and I'm wrong, and he's, a third or a fourth round draft pick. But given what we've seen so far, I think the nice part about having Graham Mertz back is you're looking at a top 50 offense. The question is going to be, can he take another step to get him into the top 15, top 20? Can some of the guys around him take a next step to allow him to take that step that gets him into the top 15 and top 20? Or we're going to kind of stay stagnant in that general area, top 40, top 50. And to be honest, that offense with the schedule is going to be a difficult road to hoe to get where Florida wants to be. So Mertz is going to have to take a step forward for Florida to get to where they need to be. It's not just enough that he's got the floor, but I think that given what they have in the quarterback room, you suspect that if Lagway's getting snaps, he's at least exceeded that floor that Graham Mertz has already established.
All right. So if you're listening to the podcast form, hopefully this still comes across or whatever. But Will, let's take a look at a few highlights. I don't want to steal people's thunder on Twitter or whatever, but we'll take a look right here. And of course, Graham Mertz. You talk about trying to hit the deep ball, and of course, here he is hitting true freshman Jere Tank Hawkins. And man, I tell you what, Hawkins just explodes off the line of scrimmage here, and of course, that's what he was known for as a true freshman coming in here from high school. But being able to use that speed, but hey, look, as we're talking deep ball, as that needs to be the focus of improvement for Graham Mertz in this offense. You see a little highlight of it right here from Graham Mertz to Tank Hawkins. Of course, let's go to the next quarterback, and then here we go. DJ Lagway doing the same thing. Throwing the ball down the field. Got Khalil Jackson down the field. And look, that's somebody else. I think he got most of the 1 reps today. So very interesting that as we look at maybe Trey Wilson being the biggest weapon on this offense, you have the outside threat maybe of Khalil Jackson, but DJ Lagway dropping back, hitting here. But another one, Will, that may have been the prettiest pass of the day. DJ Lagway rolling to his right and finds Khalil Jackson right in the corner of the end zone. That one right there, that's a big boy throw.
Well, I'll tell you, he looks a lot like Anthony Richardson out there chucking the ball around on those deep throws. Just sort of a flick of his wrist and off it goes. Obviously, they're just throwing against air, and that's something that we all have to take into account here. At the same time, it looks impressive from a physical perspective. The mental aspect, honestly, though, is the thing that I think Graham Mertz brings to the table, and is the thing where DJ Lagway is going to have to catch up. A lot of guys look good against air. A lot of
Oh, yeah.
guys look good in shorts and black shirts. So, still a long, long, long way to go. But, certainly some of the highlights coming out from the open session do tend to they show why DJ Lagway has the kind of following that he does and the kind of ranking that he does given his physical skills.
Yeah, one more here. Graham Mertz, you're finding Marcus Burke over the middle there. Little elite hand catch with his hands there for Marcus Burke. But yeah, just a few little highlights there. As Will said, tough to know what to take away, or if anything, from the first practice of spring. But yeah, you want to see good ball placement. You don't want to see drops. And yeah, from everything I can gather, not a huge issue with drops there from the receivers today. Looked in sync. Ball placement from the quarterbacks as well. I was impressed with Lagway's zip right away. That just jumped off the page, and a few other highlights and clips that I've seen there. So, look, Graham Mertz this year, of course, I expect to see some DJ Lagway, but good, limited. The open portion was like 15 minutes today, so not a whole lot to really take away from it. But there we go. Just a little bit of quarterback highlights right there. So, well, anything else, man, from the quarterback spot? Of course, I discussed it. In preview this week of the quarterback spot, what I thought about it, Graham Mertz's experience paying off, where they need to get better. We kind of hit on that too, but of course, Florida brought in Clay Millen as well as another option. Could he, push for that second spot? I think it's DJ Lagway number 2, of course, but that's just Mertz, Lagway. It's honestly the ceiling of Mertz. And how big of a step can Lagway make?
Yeah, I think the thing to look for, so I'm working on something right now that I went back and looked at Pro Football Focus numbers and was really surprised. Mertz, when the pocket was clean, was not very good last year. When the pocket broke down, he was actually excellent. And you saw the same splits when you looked at when there was a 4-man rush versus when he was blitzed. I was really surprised at that. I was surprised that a clean pocket he was struggling in. So some of these drills that we're watching, when you see that, I think one of the things you want to look at is ball placement. I think you want to look at sort of the fundamentals. And, Seth had mentioned, you had him on earlier this week, Seth Varnador, talking about Billy Napier sort of building into these different quarterbacks and some of the things mechanically that they thought they could fix when it came to Graham Mertz. And I wonder whether year 2 is going to bring more consistency to those sorts of things. Because the reality is you shouldn't be better when you're pressured than you are when the pocket is clean. That's an abnormal thing to happen. In fact, he was the only quarterback in the SEC who survived the entire year or most of the year who was better under pressure than with a clean pocket. And that's going to be the thing I think that's going to differentiate him this year, is not necessarily how does he do when there's pressure. It's when the defense decides to go zone, is it a dump off and, you get a 2-yard gain, or are you starting to attack the zones, find the holes in the zones and really zip the ball in there? And part of that is a confidence thing. Part of that is knowing the offense, but part of that is having the right mechanics to get the ball to where it needs to go. And so that's one of the things I'll be looking for in spring camp and the spring game is, obviously last year, Austin Armstrong sort of wanted to make his mark and there were blitzes coming from all over the place. I think this year we'll probably see a lot of zone coverage in the spring game. And I'll be interested to see how does Mertz do when that's the look that he gets, because that was where he struggled last year.
Insert joke here. He was so surprised when he actually had time to throw, he didn't know how to act.
Well, that'll all be part of the article, and it's somewhat true, but not exactly.
I kid.
Well, look, Seth mentioned in his YouTube sort of wrap up of that of the Napier press conference or the Napier teaching session that Napier expressed concern about the tackle play last year.
Yeah.
It's not, and they brought in 2 offensive tackles through the portal. So it's not as though that wasn't a position of need these guys thought about and thought they needed to improve on. So hopefully that bodes well for what happens, keeping Mertz clean. But also he's going to have to make the defense pay when he is allowed to stay clean.
Absolutely. So yeah, we'll get into even more position from what we could gather from the open portion of practice, some more of what Billy Napier had to say about the defensive side of the ball, as well as, of course, spring practice gets started and gets rocking. And look, guys, you know out there, you know how springtime is. When it rolls around, everything bursts into action. Well, for me, of course, it's a whirlwind with spring football, clocking into a full-time job, spending quality time with the family, even a wedding or two. It's like life turns into a big juggling act. Well, that's why I've started using Magic Mind. Helps me stay focused no matter how crazy things get. And look, while I enjoy the soda and the coffee and the occasional energy drink, I've been trying to reduce my caffeine intake to avoid those energy crashes and honestly just live healthier. I need a sustainable way to maintain my energy levels throughout the day. And that's what Magic Mind provides. Portable little bottle of Magic Mind offers the mental energy and focus I need to produce Gators Breakdown and stay active in other life areas. It's made with all natural ingredients sourced from top quality suppliers, and Magic Mind is also sugar-free, nut-free, vegan, and friendly for those on keto or paleo diets. If you're having trouble being 100% some days too, then I encourage you to try Magic Mind. You can get it at magicmind.com/Gators. Use code Gators20 to get up to 56% off your first subscription or 20% off your one-time purchase. It also works if you're already a subscriber, so you can save on your next subscription. Get the 30-pack for the best value. One more time, that's magicmind.com/Gators. Use code Gators20 to get up to 56% off your first subscription of Magic Mind. And just to show everybody, tiny little bottle right there. That's all it is. And it actually doesn't taste all that bad. It's green. The color might throw you off, but it's pretty good. Got a little citrus flavor to it. So big fan so far. Been using it about a week, and I can't tell the difference. And Will, I'm going to need it. All this spring practice, all these practices coming up, early mornings, late nights. I gotta get focused.
Hey man, that's what happens when you have kids. That's what it really boils down to. Is you got kids, and all of a sudden your schedule gets upset, and then like you said, you got your full-time job, and then Gators Breakdown, which is essentially another full-time job on top of it. So, yeah, man, I don't know how you do it. I'm always in awe of the amount of content you put out. I try to keep up. It doesn't work. So maybe that's what I need to do. The Magic Mind will help me keep up.
Here we go. Well, you got 3 kids, so that there. 4. That's right.
4 kids.
I don't know why I still was stuck on 3 still.
Well, the fourth one's the youngest. We got 12 years between them all. Every time we tell people the ages, it's like 15, 12, 9, and 3. And everybody's like, whoa, 3. Like, yes, 3.
All right, let's keep it going. Spring practice opening up right here for the Gators. And look, it was Khalil Jackson at the receiver spot. Will getting a ton of reps today. Eugene Wilson, saw Marcus Burke, Quavion Frazier's also out there. Sophomores, Aiden Mizell, Andy Jean, both with some nice adjustments for catches today and catching balls away from the body with those catches, showing nice snags there. So storyline for me, look, we didn't get to see a whole lot. You saw the one-on-ones with the quarterback, of course. We won't get to see much 7-on-7 or 11-on-11, especially early on, maybe somewhere down the road. But the storyline here continues to be, I think some people may be surprised by Khalil Jackson maybe taking a majority of the reps today. I still look for consistency from him. We saw the highlight plays last year. Can he string those together? Can he convert just to routine plays? I want to see more consistency from Khalil Jackson if he's going to be involved this much into the offense. But I still think, of course, Trey Wilson, when it's all said and done, going to be the focal point of the receiving core and the focal point probably of this offense.
Yeah, that's actually something I'm working on right now for our Read and Reaction preseason magazine, is the ways in which Billy Napier hopefully looks to get Trey Wilson open. Some of them you can see on the Florida film from last year, but honestly, there's some things you can see from, in the most part, it's sort of watching the Super Bowl between Kansas City and San Francisco. You could see a lot of different things they were doing to isolate specific players in specific situations and make sure that they took advantage of their skill set. And Trey Wilson has some skill sets that I think Florida will be able to take advantage of in those sorts of circumstances, especially down the red zone. So look, we all expect him to play well this year. I think you're going to see less of the little shovel plays that we saw last year that probably gave him 10 or 15 extra catches. The question will be, how do you replace that? Do you replace that with, say, Mizell coming across? Do you replace that with Hawkins or Abrams coming across? Because I do think you want to minimize the number of times he's hit on, say, like an 8-yard end around or a 12-yard end around. Like, give it to him in the red zone when you really got to make the score. But you don't necessarily want to give it to him 65 times and have him miss a bunch of time. You want to make sure he's ready to go when it comes to Georgia or when it comes to that stretch at the end of those 5 games where Florida's really going to need him. So who's going to step up in that room and sort of take on that position? Because I think you're looking for Wilson, maybe not necessarily to do exactly what Ricky Pearsall did last year, but at least he's going to be the focus of the offense in a similar way to the way Pearsall was last year. And so hopefully somebody's going to step up and be able to help free him up, prevent the double teams, and allow them to do some of the things they did last year where they isolated him against linebackers and were able to get him out on the edge and all those sorts of things where you use his skills and abilities to really take advantage of the defense, assuming that they can't just zone in on him and say, we're going to stop Trey Wilson, and that's about it.
Well, I don't want to single players out here. We hardly ever do that in this form, but it's got to be do or die time for Marcus Burke and the Jaquavion Frazier's, right? I mean, if I have a hard time gauging this offense, if one of those guys don't show up, is that a deterrent for this Gator offense, or do you make it up somewhere else? I guess is the best this far the offense can look is if one of those guys are a top 4 receiver in this room, or can it be made up by Gene, Mizell, Khalil Jackson, or maybe one of the freshmen come in? I mean, I have a hard time believing one of those guys won't do something this year, make a bigger contribution than they have. I hope they do. I hope both of them do. It's time to see it. But if we haven't seen it by now, is it past them by, or is there still something more? I would assume they want them they're still in the room. They're still on the team. They're still on the roster. You still think there's something more out there. But this is do or die spring for those guys.
Yeah, I think that the word you used for Khalil Jackson was consistency. And I think that's the same thing that you're looking for from Jaquavion Frazier's and from Marcus Burke, that those guys have shown flashes. Burke has shown an ability to make big plays down the field. What he hasn't shown is the ability to catch balls in the intermediate range, to take a screen pass and go for a long haul, or to necessarily be a guy on the outside who can be a blocker who frees up, the end around for a guy like Trey Wilson or something like that. And I think the thing, just like when you think about running backs, where you go, why isn't he on the field more often? And typically, more often than not, if it's a more gifted running back, it's because he can't pass protect, or that's a weakness in his particular repertoire. I think the same thing sort of applies to these guys. Frazier's made some really nice plays 2 years ago. I'm thinking specifically of a fade that he caught off of Anthony Richardson. It was just a beautiful catch over his shoulder, but then he got injured and really sort of kept him out. Burke has struggled in many cases to stay on the field and stay healthy as well. But again, it's all the downfield stuff. You haven't seen anything that's been sort of, hey, take a 10-yard hitch, break a couple of tackles, and turn that into a 25-yard gain. We haven't seen that sort of stuff from him yet. So I think the answer is consistency. And one of the reasons that you saw Trey Wilson get so much run last year is he was more consistent than those other guys. One of the reasons you didn't see guys like Gene and Mizell step into larger roles is because you didn't see the consistency of those guys. And when it came to Khalil Jackson, Ricky Pearsall, and Trey Wilson, it was really clear that those were sort of the 3 most consistent guys out there. Look, can Jere Hawkins and Tank Abrams, can those guys step up and be consistent? Like, those guys have major skills. The question will be the consistency. I think the same thing applies to Frazier's and Burke. I think the freshmen and the redshirt freshmen probably have higher ceilings than Frazier's and Burke. But you think about this being really their 3rd year now in the system. You would expect Frazier's and Burke to be able to excel, at least in terms of knowing what they're supposed to do, being in the right spot at the right time, and being able to take some of those plays that guys like, look, Pearsall's going to be a 2nd-round draft pick. I think Trey Wilson, if he continues on this path, is going to be an all-SEC player. So really, it's Jackson that they would have had to beat out last year. Now there's an open spot. I suspect we're going to hear from, I'm guessing, Marcus Burke before the season is over. I think Burke has shown an explosiveness that will be useful for the team. The question, again, will be all about consistency, play to play, and then health, obviously, play to play as well.
Yeah, as we were talking about spring practice, remember, he was the star of the spring game last year at the receiver spot, was Marcus Burke, making some unreal catches, down the field catches. So that's, where we see, sometimes spring doesn't, of course, we know it doesn't always translate. So it there's an area that we have seen it, but hasn't translated yet.
Well, and we won't see it in spring, or at least we won't see it early on in the spring. But Shamir DK is a guy who, look, he's going to take snaps from Frazier's and Burke if they're not consistent. DK is a guy who's got a lot of experience, and like I mentioned earlier, is going to have a rapport with Graham Mertz. And so I think in many ways that's sort of a shot across the bow at those guys, right? Is you bring in a transfer who's a senior who knows your quarterback, and you go, look, open competition, go win it. And so I think it's what I said about Lagway earlier is you sort of know what the floor is with DK. You know what the floor is with Jackson. You know what the floor is with Trey Wilson. So if these guys beat them out, then you at least know that they've exceeded that floor. And that's sort of the purpose of having DK there. I think if DK is the Ricky Pearsall and you've got Trey Wilson sort of in his same role and no one else really steps up and differentiates themselves, it's going to be a long year on offense. So somebody's going to have to step up. The question will be, who is it? And is it the guys with the higher ceiling or is it the guys with the longer time in the program? I think my preference, I would rather see it be from the high ceiling guys who are able to step in and excel. But, again, I think you take what you can get at this point, and development takes a back seat to winning because Florida needs to win some games this year. And if some of the older guys can help with that, then you got to let that happen.
Yeah, I mean, Captain Obvious here. I think out of those four guys, Burke, Frazier's, and then Gene and Mizell, I agree with you. If this offense is going to probably be at its best and reach a ceiling we haven't seen in the receiver room, I agree. More than likely going to have to come from Gene and Mizell. We've seen enough from Burke and Frazier's. I hope there's more there, but the unknown of the other two and what we hoped in some ways we would get a year ago when they were true freshmen, maybe we see more this year in their second year. So, all right, let's get to it right here. Offensive line, and will Austin Barber go in no contact, but in that no contact jersey. So it was interestingly, Brandon Crenshaw Dixon and Devin Manuel both taking reps at right tackle, while Cam Waits was working with Barber on the left side. Napier did confirm that with now having more depth at tackle. We get the confirmation Damian George has indeed moved to guard, and that was apparent at practice as well. So we briefly discussed the offensive line a bit, and while Graham Mertz can get better because Florida attacked the transfer portal, got some tackles, making players around him better. But as it looks right now, very first spring practice, of course, a lot of these things can change. But it does look like Cam Waits there at tackle on the left side with Barber and the two transfers on the right side.
Yeah, we'll see what comes of this. I think most of us anticipated that those tackles were going to compete at left and right tackle. So they must really like what they see from Cam Waits and really like what they saw on film from Austin Barber last year in some capacity. Obviously, Damian George was the whipping boy last year, and the enduring image of the 2023 season is going to be him getting just plowed back into Max Brown in that Florida State game when Florida needed to catch or needed to throw. And he's out of position. I think that's pretty clear based on what we saw last year, is that he was being asked to do something at the SEC level that there's a reason that he transferred out from Alabama. And it looks like, from everything in terms of the weights that they announced the other day, he's gained some weight. Now he's moving on the inside. And really, if you ask him to be a road grader, I think that might be an area where he can excel. Certainly, there will be now experience there at the guard position that you wouldn't have had if you had to plug in guys like Roderick Kearney or guys like, Bryce Lovett or something like that in order to get those guys in there at the guard position. There's not a lot other than George when it comes to upperclassmen at that guard position. If you've got Waits at tackle, in fact, there's really nobody there at that guard position in the junior and sophomore camp. And so being able to slide him inside and potentially even look, if Cam Waits is the backup left tackle, the question I have is he the starting left guard? And, if one of those guys goes down, so if Austin Barber goes down, well, now you slide him out and a guy like Roderick Kearney comes in and starts playing guard as a replacement. So that's always the question, is how do the musical chairs move when there's an injury, when someone gets rolled up on, that sort of stuff, when somebody gets dinged. We saw last year, though, obviously, I thought Jake Slaughter actually played pretty well for the entire year. But obviously
they praised him to this afternoon as well.
Yeah, well, I thought he played really well, especially at the end of the year, but I didn't think he played very well against Utah. And so I think, there are certain, and look, it's first start, but they were sort of plugging him in and out of the lineup with Kingsley Eguakin. This year, it's going to be his job to lose at least, and we'll see whether he can do that. You got Najee Harris, I guess, sort of in that guard / center spot as well, who can sort of slide in there. But again, it's a lot of youth at the guard position, so having George slide in, for as much criticism as he took last year, I think Gator fans are going to be happy to have him in there at the guard position, just from the standpoint of when you've been on the field in a place where you got to stay on sides when it's really, really loud, that's going to transfer from tackle to guard. Like those sorts of things, getting nervous, jumping off sides, all the false starts, those sorts of things he should bring to the table. And if he can prove to be a guy who sort of finds guard to be his natural position and can really aid in the running game, I think Florida will be happy with that move.
Yeah, so I guess, the way after practice one, of course, these things can change. Offensive line, as Will said, will get shuffled. But from left to right, looks like Barber Waite's left tackle, Najee Harris left guard, Slaughter at center, Roger Kearney being the cross-training backup there at the guard in the center spot, Damian George, right guard, and then Brendan Crenshaw-Dixon, Devin Manuel at right tackle. So there we go. I mean, good little set, I think, to start with. We'll see how limited Austin Barber is and how many more reps we'll be giving Cam Waits way. But I think we've got it pretty much figured out right there who will be the main contributors along this offensive line. So that would be what? About eight names there? And I know 8, 9 is the number most are looking for. Can we really stay that healthy? There's going to be the same 8, 9 we're talking about all season, or is it going to be going even deeper into the depth chart?
Well, if nothing else, there's not the drama that there was last year, right? I mean, last year in the offensive line with Micah Mazuka, there was a lot of drama around. I mean, I think he even announced on Twitter that he was transferring and all sorts of different things, right? So from the standpoint of just look, we haven't gotten through anything other than one day of spring camp, so maybe the drama's still to come. I hope not, but I think and then you had Keontae Goodwin as well, who was sort of in and out last year. So there was a lot of turnover, not just with transfers coming in, but also with guys leaving the program. And I think that having these guys in for spring practice, having them build that continuity is going to be big, because it's not just about having the best guys at the positions. It's also about, especially at offensive line, it's about having continuity, having them understand how are they going to deal with a stunt, who's picking up the blitz, what is the schematic challenge when you're picking up a blitz? How does Graham Mertz adjust protection? And can the offensive line adjust when he adjusts the protection up at the line when the defense is bringing something exotic? All of those things are things you're going to pick up on only as you play more and more and more. And I mentioned that Jake Slaughter struggled against Utah, but then played pretty well throughout the year. Well, Florida has to hit the ground running this year for a couple of reasons. One is that, quite honestly, they need to win some of those early games, but also we've seen the back end, right? They're not going to be able to go 3-4 in their first 7 and have a successful year.
Like, not only that, it's freaking Miami. Dang it. So you got to beat Miami.
Well, I mean, look, I thought they had a really good opportunity to beat Utah last year, proved to be completely wrong in terms of that one. And, so we'll see. But again, I think going back to what you're saying here, Barber is participating non-contact. Everyone else is out there full contact, it looks like, on the offensive line. So the ability to build that continuity exists. I think that's an important part of the cohesion on the offensive line, making sure these guys are all eating together, that they're hanging out together, that they're becoming a unit, because it's not going to work if it's 5 individuals. It's going to need to be, 8 guys who are out there rooting for each other, know what the job is. And when someone goes down, because in the SEC, someone will go down, that the guy who steps in is not some massive downgrade where all of a sudden you have to completely change your game plan. And that happened last year. I mean, there were times where they had guys in there. In fact, most people, I think, remember the 4th down pitch to Dante Zanders in the game against Utah. And the crazy thing about that is that both the right tackle and the left guard pulled and they ran into each other. And that's what blew up the play, was the two offensive linemen running into each other. So, obviously we had some operational issues against Utah, but that was one that was just glaringly obvious. And on a fourth down really cost Florida there. And hopefully those are the things that could be eliminated by having all these guys in camp, having all of them healthy, and building that continuity.
So this is the position group that's got the chat talking the most. So it wasn't even quarterbacks; it was offensive line. I think everybody knows how important that is.
They all know who they want at quarterback eventually, man.
Casual Carolina Fishing says O-line needs to improve big time to have that kind of success. Muddy Waters says, no relation to David Waters, is one Muddy Waters. Love seeing us at tackle actual people instead of blow up. Okay, never mind. That's not but yeah, we'll get into tackling in just a second. That was on the defensive side. Mr. Wiggs says, I hope they had enough time with the strength and conditioning coaches to get better this offseason. Muddy Waters does talk about offensive line here. If the offensive line can't get the job done on short yardage plays, then put Big Dez in at fullback. Rest in peace to any soul seeing a 6'6", 464 guy running at them. Oh, that would be be a little scary there. Muddy Waters continues to say, I really hope Kearney and Slaughter battle it out at center this spring. Slaughter was all right, but gets bull rushed too easily in pass protection. And Mike Banks says, wasn't Harris at center too? Yeah, I knew he was an option there. I think they have kind of focused on Kearney being the main backup to one of the guard spots in center. From what I've hearing, maybe he can push. Going to Muddy Waters' point, maybe he can push Slaughter. I'd expect Slaughter to be the guy unless something really goes wrong or Kearney just really blows up. Napier praised him as well as a transformation that he made in the offseason. He more lean, put more muscle. Did Roger Kearney? After seeing him last year, he was in Orange Park. He was a local guy, the highest rated offensive line recruit Billy Napier assigned so far. Knew it probably needed some time in the weight room. Very excited about where he's at. The staff is. So, all right, well, let's keep it going. Let's go to the other side of the ball, and let's talk defense. Billy Napier was asked about the relationship and how it would work between Ron Roberts and Austin Armstrong.
I mean, I think essentially you're getting, Ron's been a head coach for a number of years. He's been a coordinator for a number of years. Austin was his graduate assistant, the first interaction they had. And then obviously Austin took his system and put his spin on it. And I just think those guys, they have communicated with each other since they departed, right? I mean, they're having weekly conversations for the last few years. So I think ultimately, they're working together to build the installations, to build the scripts. Austin's running the unit meetings, and Ron's doing a good job of creating clarity for the coaches and really helping us to improve the fundamentals.
Working with the entire defensive back unit, and Austin's kind of roving around. Is that set up there?
Correct.
So that last part there. So in the practice setting, what it looks like now, Will Harris will take over the entire secondary. So even when Patrick Toney left after year one and Corey Raymond got the entire DB coach moniker, Austin Armstrong came in and was still helping with the safeties last year. No longer like that this year. It will be Will Harris taking over the entire secondary. Ron Roberts, the head coach of the defense, working with the inside linebackers. Austin Armstrong will oversee as a rover in the practice setting. And you heard what Billy Napier had to say about the responsibilities of those guys as well, putting all this together. So a little more clarity of how it's going to work. And Ron Roberts said they will use this spring to figure out the dynamic of how those two will work together. A lot of familiarity. I mean, look, Ron Roberts, all the experience in the world coming to Florida here. Look, I think we all can probably say he's not working for Austin Armstrong. There's just no way how that relationship is going to work. The head coach of the defense, I think, he got that title for a reason. And another reason is, so Billy Napier talked about it today as well, kind of the responsibility part of it is Billy Napier now has a veteran that he can kind of trust in giving that side of the ball to while he concentrates on the offense. But it does, at least on the surface, we get a little bit of clarity of how it's going to work, at least in a practice setting. And you hope, Will, that whatever dynamic comes about, and I know people will ask the question, how is this going to work? And not necessarily responsibility-wise, it's How is this going to work with two voices? Maybe you had your defensive coordinator last year, and now maybe he's not the voice that you will listen to this year, but he still has that defensive coordinator title. That's what these next 5 weeks of spring practice, Ron Roberts even said it himself, is for them to figure that out.
Yeah, I think that there is real legitimacy to having a concern about how these guys are going to work together. They've worked together in the past, but it was Armstrong as the subordinate and Roberts as the lead guy. And now you've got them sort of maybe kind of at equivalent levels. And the question obviously is, when it comes down to it, you make a third down call and you decide to go cover zero. Is that Ron Roberts' call to go cover zero, or is that Austin Armstrong's call to go cover zero? And then who takes the blame on the backside, if depending upon who gets to make that call and who's decided that's the right way to go? I think obviously that's a legitimate concern for people to have. At the same time, I'm thrilled that Austin Armstrong isn't coaching the defensive backs, because the defensive backs were terrible last year. And so whatever he was doing was not doing the job when it came to the defensive backs. The cornerbacks were below average, regardless of what stat you look at. The safeties, other than Jordan Castell, were really bad. And one of the reasons I think Jordan Castell struggled at times is because he didn't have a running mate that he could actually trust. Right? You had guys like Kamari Wilson who just weren't able to get on the field. You had Miguel Mitchell who's transferred out.
Moten has since moved to linebacker.
Yeah, you had RJ Moten, who's now moved to linebacker, and they've brought in guys, right? They brought in Asa Turner and DJ Douglas from Tulane, Turner from Washington, guys with real FBS experience at the safety position, who are going to be able to provide at least some baseline level of competence there. But that only works if everybody's on the same page. And I think handing that over to Harris to do the defensive backs, Roberts paying attention to the linebackers, at least that clarity means that if the linebackers are awful, we'll know whose problem it is. If the defensive line is awful, we'll know whose problem it is. If the safeties or the corners are awful, we'll know whose problem that is. Or if they're good, we'll know who should be praised for the individual, the individuals excelling at those particular spots. Florida has.
But before you go there, because I want to go to your point, I don't mean to interrupt you there, but that really goes into a relation with Billy Napier had to say, and he said it multiple times about the defense, is we finally have experience on that side of the ball. So when you talk about the coaches and we'll know who gets the credit for if it looks good, Billy Napier is also relying on that experience from last year really paying off in tandem with what we're talking about in the coaches.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, yes, they have experience there. I also don't think we could ignore the fact that much of the experience that Florida had at those positions got run off by Billy Napier, maybe rightly so, but there are guys who were there in that defensive back room 2 years ago who decided to transfer. There were guys who decided to transfer right after Napier was hired. Certainly, I think we have a better handle on the transfer portal these days, so it's not really a surprise when guys transfer out, especially when there's a coaching change. At the same time, there was nobody who was a senior in that room last year who could really pull guys aside and take that leadership mantle. I think that's what you're kind of hoping for, is that it's not just on Will Harris to make sure the defensive backs get stuff together. Look, if you go play Tennessee, it's going to go quick. You don't have time to go over there and have Ron Roberts tell you what to do or Austin Armstrong tell you what to do. You got to know who you're covering. You can't bust the coverages. You can't do the stuff that Florida's done the last couple of years, not necessarily last year against the Vols, but you can't do those sorts of things. I mean, the game against Kentucky last year, like, Florida just could not right the ship no matter what happened. And you wind up with Kentucky just running all over them and not ever really fixing the problem over the course of the game. Those sorts of things.
18 versus Missouri that somehow you leave too much pad against the receiver. I mean, yeah, there were even some really big plays against Florida State. I was going back and looking at some film the other day, and there was a play where I just looked at, and Jalen Hill was not where he was supposed to be on a play that went across the middle for a big first down when Florida State was backed up. And if Florida forces a punt there, that sort of changes the complexion of the game. I think one of the misnomers when we look at this 2024 schedule is that Florida was really far away from, 5-7, obviously not very good. That team was not far away from being 7-5. I think they were very far away from being 9-3. And so that's the question to me, is I think with a few adjustments and a few new players, 7-5 is absolutely doable. The question is, can you get it and really ramp it up to where you get to 8-4, 9-3? I know Vegas has them at 5.5 this year, and I understand why it sits there, and I know what's coming up on the backside of that schedule.
But you start sort of ticking off each of those games, and you go, there's a reason why Texas A&M might be somebody that Florida could tick off. Oh, there's a reason why Miami might be a team that Florida could pick off. Okay, UCF, yeah, okay, miles on, but still, I mean, there's a reason that Florida should be able to beat them. So you sort of go down, especially those first 7 games. There's an opportunity for Florida to start out really, really well, but it's all going to come, in my mind, not just from the development of the coaches. I actually think, we spend a lot of time talking about Ron Roberts and Austin Armstrong. I think the big thing is going to be when you're getting torched, and it will happen at some point. They're going to give up some big plays. Do guys like Asa Turner and DJ Douglas, do they continue to do the fundamental things they've been taught to do because they don't panic, because they've been out on the field a lot and they understand that sometimes big plays happen, as opposed to, you see this in basketball all the time where a team falls behind and all of a sudden they start chucking 3-pointers. It's not a good shot, and they just end up falling further and further and further and further behind. And I think in some cases last year you had guys coming up to make a big hit. Well, you miss them and all of a sudden it turns into a big play. You had a guy going for a pick instead of just knocking the ball down on a throw deep down the field. Got a guy trying to do too much on a 4th and 18, and all of a sudden that gets converted because you're not necessarily fundamentally sound. To me, that's where the experience on the field comes in, is making sure that, hey, we're going to do fundamentally what we're coached to do. We're going to trust that the guy next to us is going to do fundamentally what he's been coached to do. And if they're able to do that, if they're able to communicate that through, then I think having both of these guys game planning will be a major, major advantage. The only place I see this as being bad is if things start to spiral out of control. Because if things start to spiral out of control on defense, then the question becomes, all right, well, what do you do now? Right. And then it starts to maybe become an area where you would see friction. But I think there's an opportunity for Florida here to have a pretty successful first half of the year. Obviously, the second half is a gauntlet. But if you set yourself up 5-2, 6-1, by the time you get to that Georgia game, what does that set you up for in the back end in terms of confidence, in terms of, the communication in the locker room, all those sorts of things? I think there's an opportunity there. I mean, do I think they're going to get there? I think it's a big ask, but that's sort of what Billy Napier and this defense have set themselves up for.
Yeah. Well, what crossed my mind as you were talking about that, I hope, good or bad, this is what I want to see. I want to see Miami on the very first play of the game, very first play of the season for their offense. I want to see them take a deep shot. Because I want to know right away, and now don't get me wrong, it's not going to tell the it's not going to tell the story of a season, but I want to know right away, can Florida defend a deep pass? So that either means taking the quarterback's head off, taking Cam Ward's head off, getting back there and getting a sack, or that ball travels 50 yards in the air and the DB's got to make a play on it. I mean,
so if they hit it like Utah did last year, I might just cry and give up. Like sort of. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's what. So clearly, the Achilles heel for Florida last year was big plays. Clearly, that is a space where Austin Armstrong has struggled in the past. And if you're going to try to sort of demoralize the Gator defense right off the bat,
yeah,
it's pretty obvious that's what you're going to do. Do you do it on the first play?
Miami, that's what I'm doing.
Well, so I think a lot of it depends on your own team, right? And what you have and all those sorts of things. But yeah, you're going to challenge them. I think Florida has not shown a proclivity to be able to stop anybody. So if I'm game planning for them, I'm certainly coming in and trying to be aggressive, understand what they're going to do on defense, and make sure that you take the shot. Now, the thing is that if you look at last year in that game, it's not like Florida was playing a defense to sort of like, they weren't playing quarters on that opening play against Utah, right? They were being aggressive. They were trying to stop the run, and they essentially were daring Barnes, the backup quarterback for Utah, to go deep, and he burned him. And that, to me, is going to be maybe more the question is, do you start to play a little bit more conservatively on the back end if you don't have confidence in those guys to be able to keep everything in front of them? Because, I get that Austin Armstrong changed a lot of things last year throughout the year, tried a bunch of things, none of them really worked. At the same time, to go out and be aggressive man-to-man and basically allow that deep post to be a man-to-man endeavor out there, that's aggressive. And that has been sort of my criticism of him over the last year since Florida hired him, is that a lot of times I feel like Armstrong is aggressive when he doesn't have to be. I've seen him run cover 0 when you go look at the tape when he was at Southern Miss. I've seen him run cover 0 on 3rd and 8 from the opponent's 20-yard line. And you're sitting there going, that's a real risk reward proposition right there. Maybe you get to the quarterback, maybe you cause a turnover, but you're also putting a lot of pressure on your defensive backs. So I actually think that'll be the interesting thing there, Dave, is not only do you think Miami's going to go deep, but what are they doing to counter that? Are they helping their defensive backs by not necessarily saying, yeah, go cover them one-on-one? Like, go ahead. And maybe they do that because they have confidence in them now, because they have better defensive backs, and that may be entirely possible too.
Sorry, not to toot my own horn here, but texting Cole Cubic because he wants me on the show tomorrow morning. So there we go.
We see you go ahead and just ignore us when you got
Yeah,
the ESPN personalities coming after you, Dave. We get it.
I don't try and text during the show or whatever, but I had to set that up. So
That's pretty cool, buddy.
yeah.
You've built this thing up to a point where you got those guys asking you to be on. So tell them to change the name of his show, though.
If I'm not mistaken, this would be the one with him and McElroy on JOX in Alabama tomorrow. So
yeah, cool.
All right, let's keep it going. I'll group all these together so we can get through the end of this episode here. And of course, we got confirmation, Will, of Kelvin Collins moving from edge to the defensive line. That's where he was at in this very first practice, not lined up. We questioned in the preview if he would be on the edge as more of that strong side defensive end or in the F spot, but looks like on the defensive line, defensive end, and looks to be providing depth to the end spot there with Joey Slackman and Caleb Banks. Slackman was out there going through drills in the non-contact, still recovering from the bicep injury. So what that does, Will, it opens the door. True sophomore TJ Searcy at the Jack edge spot, and with him would be George Gums Jr., Quincy Ivory, Jamarcus Weston, while Jack Pyburn still recovering from his torn ACL. A lot of inexperience at that crucial spot, replacing Princely Human-Mielen. And one more item at edge, and of course, I think we all wanted to see it, and I think we knew this is where it was going to be. LJ McCray working at the F spot, the true freshman, like we assumed, gives Florida at that F spot the return of Justice Boone, Tyreek Sapp, Cam James, Brian Taylor to go along with McCray. I think there's a lot to like about that group. The Jack outside linebacker still scares me. Not a lot of experience in that room. I like some of what TJ Searcy showed us last year, but man, that is such an inexperienced group when you got to replace Princely Human-Mielen there. Also, Will, not much going on in the defensive backfield in the open portion of practice. It was clear that tackling was the focus. For all I care, they could practice that all day, every day after what we have seen in recent years. So no issues seeing the tackling drills. And look, Will Harris was out there, the DB coach, taking hits with a pad in his hands and let the DBs tackle him onto a pad. So him getting his feet wet as the DB coach. Jordan Castell did not take part in practice with a no-contact jersey as well. Or he took part, just no contact for him. And then you had the safety transfers. Asa Turner, Triquez Bridges looked good a little bit out there through the tackle drills. So up front, Will, on the back end, what we're looking at here, just that inexperience at the Jack spot really worries me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that's a space where they were concerned about last year, right? I mean, Billy Napier talked about trying to add guys after the spring in that spring's portal session. They really didn't add anybody at that spot at that point. And certainly that became an area of concern. Now, the one thing I will say is that when we talk about replacing Princely Human-Mielen, we're talking about a flawed player, at least at Florida last year.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean he wasn't good, but it means he was not elite. He wasn't a guy that you had to game plan around. And I think that's one of the things that you start to really think about in terms of some of the guys on the defense is who's going to step up and be one of those guys that the defense says, oh, we got to chip that guy when he comes around the edge. You hope maybe that LJ McCray on third down can be that guy because he's got that kind of ability. But if Searcy can be a guy where you got to really worry about where he's at, or even at the defensive end spot, if you've got a guy like Justice Boone who can step up and be that kind of guy and be somebody who you've got to be concerned about. Look, I mean, the last time Florida's defense was any good was 2019. And that was when John Grenard was out there on the edge, just sort of raining havoc on everybody. And his ability to get into the backfield was special. There's a reason why he's in the NFL. Florida hasn't had a guy like that in a really long time. And so to me, that's sort of the question is can one of these young guys step up into that role and be a guy you've actually got a game plan against? Because it's been a long time. I mean, look, we had the Jabari Zuniga and Ja'Kai Polite sort of connection there. Then we had Grenard come in, and it's just been nobody ever since. There hadn't been, I mean, I can't remember. Have we had anybody who's had more than 10 sacks?
Since
2019, since Grenard? Maybe
20.
Carter, Zach Carter maybe got there.
I don't think so.
But I would say Carter was not a guy you game planned against. Brenton Cox wasn't a guy you game planned against. Human Milan wasn't a guy you game planned against. So to me, that's the thing is, can they identify the guy who you're going to have to game plan against? So like if you go into, I guarantee you when Florida goes to play LSU this year, their offensive line will know where Harold Perkins is the entire game. And that's the question I have. So can that be LJ McCray? Can that be TJ Searcy? Can it be Jamarcus Weston, right? They talk about moving him there too. A lot of inexperience, and that is a space I'd be worried about. But to me, it's not just about replicating what Human Milan brought. It's about actually identifying who the difference maker is.
I was looking quickly here for Zach Carter. No, definitely didn't hit 10. I don't think so since 2019.
Yeah, they need somebody who can put up, who demands a double team if he's not going to get to 10. And they just haven't had anybody like that in years.
Yeah, I mean, and Princely was the only, like, as you, going to your point, you didn't have to game plan for him, but you at least knew he was the only one you had to stop.
Well, and you could almost scheme him out because of the things that he struggled with when it came to some of the things. And again, this isn't a knock on Human Milan. He's a good player, but there were times where he struggled holding the edge and against running plays. And I don't think that's an unfair thing to say. Maybe he's able to turn that around at Ole Miss, and all of a sudden he's a first day, second day draft pick there in the NFL. But he's going to have to turn that around. There were ways to attack Human Milan when he was on the field. So you, far from just saying, how do we keep this guy from hurting us? You could actually say, how are we going to take advantage of his weaknesses? Is Florida going to have a guy where they actually have to game plan and say, how do we prevent that guy from harming us? That would be a really nice problem to have. Hopefully that's a guy like Searcy who can step up. Or again, look, when all you tell a guy is go out there, pin your ears back and go get to the quarterback, you can be a true freshman and do that. So maybe McCray has the ability to really bring some of that value, kind of like Perkins did for LSU a couple years ago.
Yeah. Kelby Collins showed some flashes as a pass rusher freshman last year. Hopefully he builds on that as well. But yeah, I mean, more than likely, if it's somebody who's going to be in the backfield for this Florida defense, it's going to be a young, unproven so far name. So that's what Florida's got to develop right here this spring. One practice down, many more to go coming up here in the next few weeks. Spring game, April 13th, of course. So, Will, anything else, man, to wrap up this first spring practice?
Well, I will say Joey Slackman looked like he was built like a house. I saw a video of him and went, woo, man, that's a big dude. So you think about Cam Jackson and Big Dez there in the center, and then Slackman out there as well. Caleb Banks, we'll see if he can step up and play a role. I think the rotation up front in the middle is going to be something that will be exciting to see. And if Slackman can transfer what he was doing at Penn, obviously an Ivy League school, but if he can transfer what he was doing to Florida, all of a sudden now you got a guy who can be disruptive and can really make the quarterback have to move off of his spot. And again, like we're talking about Florida getting into the backfield on the edges, Florida hasn't gotten into the backfield up the middle that much either. And so I'm hopeful that Slackman, I didn't realize he was that big. Yeah. I was not expecting him to be as big as I saw today. All I saw was him hitting a tackling sled, but still, I was like, man, that dude's as big as a house. Like, he's huge.
Yeah. I'm like you. I like defensive line, defensive end depth. Need some playmakers there. As we're talking about at that jack spot, help that spot out with that deep rotation that's going to be beside those guys. So. All right, there we go. All right, spring practice one in the books. That'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. Will, you mentioned a couple times what you got, what you're working on there at Reading Reaction.
Yeah, I'm working on something for Mertz. I actually wanted to look into the film. Like I said, he when he was clean, he struggled last year. When he was under pressure, he excelled. And so the question I'm trying to figure out by looking at the film is why is that? So that's going to be coming up sometime the next week or so.
Yeah, so hopefully as the days go by, maybe we get some more on defensive back. Didn't really talk linebackers all that much tonight. It wasn't much to show there from the open portions of practice, but of course, many more of those to come as well. We'll get to hear from all the coaches in spring. That's what I like about spring too. We hear from the assistant coaches, so it'll be kind of position by position as the spring goes on as well. So that'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. For Will Miles, thank you for listening and watching this episode of Gators Breakdown.